say I've got a French bow. Once again, without the visual, it's a little hard. But they come at it with their fingers bent, and they almost immediately have their fingers angled down. So I hold the bow up and say, imagine you just fell off a cliff. And I teach, I know it's controversial in some ways that it's like I'm not teaching them the exact nuances of French bow, but I'm starting with something they can do. So they grip the bow as if they were hanging from a cliff, and it gets weight into their fingers and takes the thumb out of the equation. And I guess that's a good way to put it with both hands. I take the thumb out of the equation completely to start with. Otherwise, that's where it'll go off the rails.
Today's guest, I've had some fun times with him. He's been in the bass business for a while, teaches in Texas. We talk about that and much more. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and Nick Scales is our guest today. I know you're going to have a good time with this conversation. He's a great guy, great player, thoughtful guy, just all the good things. That's Nick. And we had a good time. And it's the first time I've ever had him on the podcast, which is surprising, but we'll definitely have him back in the future. I want to give a quick shout out here at the beginning to our sponsors, Upton Bass, Modacity, D'Addario Strings, The Bass Violin Shop, Steve Swan String Bass, A440 Violin Shop, and Colstein Music. Thank you so much, and here we go with today's episode. Nick Scales.
Yeah.
Good to see you, man. Last time I saw you was at TMEA, I think, this year, 2019. Here we are, 2019.
Yes.
ISB convention.
Just a few months later. Right.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's new?
Nada, just enjoying the bass love.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
How many of these conventions have you been to in the past?
Oh, gosh. The very first one I went to was New York City in 1990.
Okay.
And so that was Milt Hinton's 80th birthday. That was like a formative time for me. And I've kind of had to do mix and match in between because of summer gigs and things.
Sure.
But I guess, how many would that be between then and now? The only ones I've missed were the last Indiana and Interlaken. I think I've missed 3 or 4 of all of them overall.
Okay.
So.
Okay, cool. Wow. Tell people, I know what you do, but tell people about where you teach and some of the things that you're up to.
Yeah, I teach at West Texas A&M University. It's not the A&M, it's a satellite university outside of Amarillo, Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. I'm principal bass of the Amarillo Symphony and do a lot of jazz and classical playing in that area, and I'm also principal bass of the Utah Festival Opera and Musical Theater Company.
That's a nice suite of activities. Yeah,
yes.
Keeping nice and
very busy.
And I think your name first came up on the podcast from Inez.
Oh yeah,
Wyrick.
Yep.
And
Wyrick.
Did you Wyrick?
Yeah.
I should know. Did you study with her growing up? That's what I thought.
I'm
right?
in that group that original ISB cover with. It's from 1983 or 84. With a bunch of basses sitting in a circle. We had this super large bass ensemble out of Amarillo, Texas. We had about 53 bass players. And I started working with her when I was in 8th grade.
So you grew up around there in Amarillo?
Yeah, and then I moved away for grad school and for years after that. And then when the job opened up, I ended up back there. But I studied at that school with David Murray when he taught there.
Okay, so
I was his first student when he was a full-time teacher.
Okay, so if anybody's listened to the podcast for a while, if they've ever listened to my chat with David Murray or with Inez, we've talked about that time in the Amarillo and the mini pranks.
I was in on some of those.
Okay. Okay. Any that you can share on the podcast? That several have been shared, but any that come to mind that won't.
One of my favorites is when Inez decided to leave an interesting picture in my Brahms part, and I put my music. She thought my part was out on my stand, and I was running late, so she took the time to pin this. I'll just say risque photo into a Brahms right after a really fast page turn in Brahms 2. And I came out on stage and set my music on a new stand. She had put it in my stand partner's part, this really conservative kid from Abilene who had no idea what he was getting into. And then we started the concert. So about halfway through the Brahms, that part of the concert, he turned a page, and all of a sudden I could see Inez starting to chuckle out of the left side of my eye, and I could see Todd pulling something out of his music on the right side. And I found out later that he was horribly embarrassed. It was really fun. It was stuff like that all the time. Bass bingo. We had a really good time in that section.
It's all about the art of finding that page turn.
Yes. With
the silence after it.
Yes.
The activity in the bass, you're not going to turn it early.
Right.
And then you turn it. We did one in E.T., the John Williams E.T., but there's one, you flip a page in there, you got like 8 bars of rest or something, and it was our principal bassist in the Elgin Symphony, his birthday. So I made E-Tim in Photoshop, and my Photoshop skills are really bad.
Oh, wow.
So I had like E.T., and then I just had this like totally like bizarro photo of Tim's face. It was right there, and Tim's wife said, because the whole bass section was jumping up and down with chuckles,
right,
like holding it in, and it was very noticeable from the audience.
Yeah, and of course the goal is always to make sure that the conductor and you don't cause any ripples in what we do, but it's still
undetected mischief.
Exactly. David Murray and I played together one time, and we still talk about this, and he still wants to get even with me for it. But we played this church gig that we were doing about 8 performances, and it was just the two of us, and all week he had been pulling things on me. He would change a bowing suddenly and hook my bow with his pinky and actually pulled my bow out of my hand, and it went into his hand. I mean, just crazy stuff all week long. So I kept watching and waiting, and there was this one page turn that he had to do, and he would do the same thing. It's hard to explain it without the visuals, but he'd run his finger down the inside of the page just about an inch. So I took temporary tape, and I taped the page together about 3 inches in. So he pulled that part out. It was whole Christmas Day, and he ran his finger down. We got to the really fast page turn. He went to turn the page, and the entire thing flew out into the audience and just went drifting out into the audience.
You took, or maybe still take, pranks to a new level. That is. I
was quite proud of myself, and he's never really gotten even with me for it. It was the last thing we played together before I left, and so he's tried one other time to get even with me, and he accidentally put something in somebody else's part. He got the wrong one. So,
that's a great time to be there, and those
yes.
two. So where'd you go next?
I went to the University of North Texas and did my master's, starting with Ed Rainbow, and then I finished with Jeff Braditich.
Okay.
And I was adjunct at North Texas for a couple of years, and then I taught adjunct at TCU for about 10 years and played in the Dallas Opera Orchestra. I was a corps member there and freelanced in the area, subbed with Fort Worth and a bunch of the Dallas area orchestras. And then the job opened up at West Texas, where I'd gone in 2005. So it was fun. I even got to teach for 1 year in the office where I took lessons with David Murray. So it was fun to go full circle.
That's really cool, and come back home like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's where I've been for 14 years now.
What is an American style of bass? Here's Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on the topic.
So there's a joke about American instruments. All right. If I can take 4 violins and go to let's say a top-notch violin appraiser, and he can take the first one out and look at it and go, well, this one's clearly Italian because of all these features. Next one, oh, this is French because of all these features. Next one, no, this is English because of these features. 4th violin, they can't tell what it is, and then they go, it's American. It's got a little bit of everything. Learn more about their Bostonian, American-style model and so many other things that they have to offer you at uptonbass.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, which is home to the largest collection of double basses on the West Coast between Los Angeles and Canada. That's a lot of miles, folks. Steve's showroom is outstanding.
absolutely worth a visit. It's located just south of San Francisco Airport, SFO, and he has about 70 basses on display. And these basses range from student entry-level instruments all the way to the finest professional instruments. I've sent so many students and referred so many people to Steve's shop. He really does great work. And if you're looking for a bass, you're going to find one that suits your needs, your playing needs, and your budgetary needs for sure. SteveSwanStringBass.com is where you can go. And thank you, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. There is this mode in my practicing app, Modacity, which I totally love. It's called Deliberate Practice, and it's such a cool feature. Here's Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on how this works.
One of my pain points as a musician was like not really having a method to generate reliable improvement. And deliberate practice is like the scientific method for music practice. So what you do is you identify the one thing that you want to improve, be it articulation, intonation, emotion, comfort, whatever it is you want to improve, and brainstorm or choose one of the pre-suggested strategies for that area of improvement, and then test it out. Record yourself trying that strategy, listen back, and press yes, it worked, or no, it didn't work to create that improvement.
It's such a clean way of tracking your progress. I do it every day, and it has done wonders for my bass playing and just my overall enthusiasm for music. You got to check it out. Modacity.co is the site, and if you go to our site, you can click through it and get a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity.
What's Amarillo like? I've never been to Amarillo. I haven't explored a lot of Texas. When we saw each other a couple of months ago, that was my first time in San Antonio ever.
Right.
Then I went up to Austin my first time. So
well, you'll have to come and visit sometime.
Yeah.
The town itself, it's old Route 66, so there's a lot of history and a lot of cool stuff. But I always tell everybody if they're coming through, they have to take enough time to go to Paladera Canyon, because if you're just passing through town, it seems like a small, fairly flat, boring place, but there's a beautiful canyon close to there with great hiking, Paladero Canyon. It's worth seeing, and it kind of changes your perspective, and you see what West Texas, kind of the old vision of West Texas and what it is. But Amarillo's, since I've been there, they've put a baseball stadium downtown with a minor league team. We have a jazz club that we didn't have before. I'm playing jazz more than I ever did in Dallas-Fort Worth. We've got a jazz club and 4 other venues that have regular groups, and it's kind of taken off a lot. And the university is a really nice, small, very affordable school, but with a really great, I've got a string quartet as my colleagues who won the Fish-Off competition some years back, and a fantastic orchestra director. So there's a lot more going on there than it seems.
So whenever I think of Texas, I used to teach orchestra, high school orchestra, and Texas is like, people think Texas is like this land of enchantment in terms of although that's New Mexico's tagline, but
right.
In terms of just the quality of schools and the programs. Is it like that way all across the state?
So I guess you could say relatively speaking.
Okay.
They're all well supported. Like even in West Texas, they're well supported, but they're a little more detached. I think in some ways in Texas, the big cities have kind of outpaced a little bit, and those of us in West Texas in that area are trying to get the level up to match.
Yeah.
But we're enough detached and we're far enough away from those areas, it's hard for the kids to understand, because you need that practice room culture. If they're seeing those kids who are playing Don Juan at Allstate, I helped pick the Allstate etudes for Texas, and it's kind of ironic because I've for 15 years now, I've helped pick the Allstate etudes each year, and I've only had 2 Allstaters from my neck of the woods up there in Amarillo. I had 7 the last year I taught in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And it's just a different emphasis. Kids are a lot busier, but the programs are well supported, and it kind of goes up and down, but it's still... as much as I could sound like I'm dissing it, it's still way better than so many other parts of the country.
Oh, yeah. It was remarkable. Illinois has, by and large, good orchestra programs, too. Right. And it was interesting, and I'm not dissing California, but it is really interesting moving out to California, which is a whole different ball of wax in terms of, like, you know, Illinois, or at least where I taught in Illinois, and certainly a lot of Texas, you have your orchestra director, your assistant orchestra director, your band director, and your 2 or 3 assistants.
Yes.
Marching band. You got this and that. I went to Allen, Texas, in the Dallas area, and I think their facilities were nicer than what Northwestern had at the time.
Yes.
It's just a whole different level. And then the level at which these all-state students are playing is remarkable. It's no surprise that I look at a lot of people that have won auditions over the last few years. I've been talking to people. So many people came through Texas and did all-state.
Right. Well, my sister was an all-stater in the orchestra with John Hood and Hal Robinson.
Wow.
Back in the early 70s, late 60s. Yeah. And that history has gone. It's fun to look down the roster of the Texas All-Staters and see. I've got some former students who play in orchestras now, and that All-State thing was a really important, as much as it gets to become rote teaching, and it has its problematic side to it in the state, the level is incredible.
Yeah.
When they crossed the line a few years ago and did Don Juan, the Shostakovich 5 had been a regular thing, things like that, and they pulled it off really well, and they have double wins. But Don Juan was a whole new level, and then they followed it up with Alpine Symphony, and then this last year they did A Rite of Spring for high school orchestra, and it's hard to fathom for a lot of other states what we can do there, and we have 3 orchestras doing that. It's pretty amazing.
And high school orchestra, not only, first of all, playing Rite of Spring, that is something. High school orchestra coming together, not having played together for just a few days.
They do it in 3 days.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I haven't put Rite of Spring together in 3 days in any ensemble that I've played it. Yeah, right? Right? Yeah.
It's crazy. And that's the level we've achieved now, and it's trickling down. It's part of what my presentation was about here, is trying to get now. You did a fantastic presentation at TMEA, and I talked about you in my presentation here yesterday.
Thanks, man. Thank you for coming. It's an honor to. Yeah, that was. Thank you.
I mentioned what I mentioned in your presentation at TMEA. The disconnect that we have in bass world with other string teachers, violin, viola, and cellos who teach strings, is. You got bogged down. You had a 50-minute presentation figured, and you were probably, 20 minutes into your slides, and you got stopped there with all the questions about how do you shift, how do you do this, what is the bass? And people were freaked out, and that's the thing that we've still got to fix. That's our disconnect for our instrument.
Yeah.
That's what I was addressing yesterday, too. It's like we're, as far as we've come, you can see there's a big bubble. Those kids who are good enough to make All-State, and you hear it. I judge the auditions, and you hear it. There are usually about 15 kids who are really at that high level, about 15 who are kind of in the middle, and then it drops rapidly.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that we deal with. We've still got to get that bottom level up a little higher, because I feel like it's at a lower level than the other strings.
Well, I'm not thinking about Inez and like her talking with her about just all the different things she did, like building programs and working with anybody and getting them involved and getting that level up. And I use her materials all the time.
Oh yeah.
Every week I'm using them.
Yeah, they're fantastic, and it was her energy that. A lot of what she did, I still use in my teaching, because it's what you have to do. You can't leave anybody behind, really, in a situation like that. It's the problem with sometimes conservatory trained teachers who come into a place like that. They don't quite understand the resources they really have at that lowest level, and so they'll come in and it's like, oh, well, none of these kids are up to the level I'd like to teach. Well, you got to get them there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes time. It's taking a lot more time than I originally thought, but I can see it happening even with what I've been doing since I've been back, because they'd gone through a lot of transition there, and so the level had dropped off, and it's a slow process, but really getting there.
What was the title of your presentation?
Oh, it was Teaching Bass in a Day to the Non-Bass String Teacher. And I do these kinds of presentations all the time. I do in-service things for school districts, and I've done this at TMEA and different places, where I go in and talk more about our similarities than our differences. But it's the same kind of thing. It's the same thing you were doing at TMEA. We all try to be evangelists about it. But I'm changing what I talked about yesterday was a little bit of advocacy, and it was watching your presentation with Andy Moritz that changed my perspective a little bit, where we shouldn't have to keep doing this. and we have to fix it. And it was talking about how we go off the rails a little bit, both in schools like mine, where a lot of times you have whoever is teaching string methods just has the smallest load.
Right.
and so a lot of times bass just gets kind of brushed over in those string methods classes unless you're at a big music ed school. And so you can see where the problem builds up, and people just don't have string backgrounds. And so they need a simple way that they can look at bass the same as violin, viola, and cello, where the words sound exactly the same, and it's not as imposing and terrifying to them. And so that's what I try to use as like a verbiage that ties in with them so that they can find common ground. Actually, I was just working with the Eastman Strings representative, who's a violinist, showing her how I teach a bow hold and left hand.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Here's a great tip. Change your strings 2 at a time, removing them from the inside out, then replacing them from the outside in allows for easy access to the lower pegs, ensuring strings lay neatly in the peg box. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. Did you know that they regularly ship basses nationally from coast to coast? Contact their team to find out more information about the shipping process and how you can get your dream bass delivered to your doorstep. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. Whenever anybody's going to the Midwest, and I lived in Chicago, Illinois for years and years, I tell them to go to A440. If they're looking for a bow, if they're looking for a bass, if they need some repairs done, if they have a student who's looking for an instrument, A440 has been serving the community for years and years. They're located just west of Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago. They do great work, and they've been a big supporter of bass events over the years, whether it's the Chicago Bass Festival or really any bass event. A440, you guys rock. Check them out at a440violinshop.com.
So how do you teach a bow hold in a left hand? I know that most people are bassists here, but a lot of them are teachers and want to know what's your, just talk through your approach.
Well, like it's using the words differently, and it's like we've all heard, instead of using bow hold or bow grip, cradle. Talking from a standpoint of weight, and like for if I'm dealing with upper string players, they come at the bow. Say I've got a French bow. Once again, without the visual, it's a little hard, but they come at it with their fingers bent, and they almost immediately have their fingers angled down. So I hold the bow up and say, imagine you just fell off a cliff. And I teach. I know it's controversial in some ways that it's like I'm not teaching them the exact nuances of French bow, but I'm starting with something they can do. So they grip the bow as if they were hanging from a cliff, and it gets weight into their fingers and takes the thumb out of the equation. And I guess that's a good way to put it with both hands. I take the thumb out of the equation completely to start with, otherwise that's where it'll go off the rails. Same here. They start with weight and keep the thumb off the neck, so they learn how to just balance the bass and focus on that. And I could get into a whole bunch of details, but it's like I use a lot of analogies that tie in with violin, viola, and cello.
And everywhere is set up differently, and people may or may not have things like stools. But if in an ideal world, would you start people sitting, standing, or
even in an ideal world, the thing is, that's what I was talking about yesterday, is that we don't have an ideal world.
Yeah.
I've heard different stories about somebody coming in to do a clinic with a school district and saying, well, you just need to put bent end pins in all your basses, and they're like, but we've got an 80-year-old K bass with old strings. I'd rather put new strings on it first. It's that.
Yeah.
So. I guess in an ideal world, yes, I would either one.
Yeah,
it's like I think we should just teach bass. And so sitting or standing should be the same approach, because they should be able to balance the instrument.
Yeah,
and so all those other things to me are just what's the word I'm looking for? Outside of it, the main thing is the core thing. I mean, you look at Edgar Meyer; he stands, plays beautifully. Jeff Braddock just sits; he plays beautifully. They both have balance and control of the instrument, and so the idea is that we learn to do that. Where you can teach, I look at all those things as a benefit and not a liability. And I think that string teachers get kind of overwhelmed with all the possibilities. But if their teaching is geared towards working around any of those possibilities, if they can get some stools, great. If the kids are having to play standing, but they know how to look at their posture. Oh, that's the big thing about my thing yesterday is I started with posture.
Yeah.
And if you focus on posture, which, like I said there, it sounds snooty, but any good string teacher should be focused on posture, because that's the one thing you can look all the way around the group and tell if things are going off the rails, if things are working.
Yeah.
And so if it starts with that, then it won't matter if they're standing or sitting or Ben Impen or whatever, French, German bow. It's like, I think it's all great.
Yeah.
It's a matter of teaching in a way where those are just cool extra things and not dogmatic.
Yeah. No, it's the older I get, the less firm my opinions are on any of those things.
Right. I'm the same way.
Yeah. And
I used to be firmly standing. I was firmly
really?
standing. That was how I was taught. That's how I thought you should teach. But then when I realized that you can teach sitting exactly the same way you teach standing, and it's the exact same posture, I was like, well, cool.
And one of the headliners for this convention, Aaron Olguin, has been really fun.
Oh, he's amazing.
He's amazing and incredibly, and former podcast guest now at this point. And he's so open-minded. I remember I played with him in Mexico last fall at Andres Martin's event.
That looked so fun.
And then more recently, he's maybe I'll try standing for this. Maybe I'll try sitting for this. Oh, maybe I'm going to try that bass. Oh, maybe I'll try some French bow.
Yeah.
Oh, let's do this. Oh, maybe I'm going to play this on this string. Just incredibly, there's no one answer, and it's enriching to try all these different things.
Yeah, and actually part of my mindset on that happened the summer I studied at Indiana. Larry Hurst and Jack Budrow, I was working with them, and my spiccato was still kind of a little more, I guess you could call it soloistic. I'd been at that point, I'd copied Gary's playing a lot, and I didn't have a good orchestral spiccato, and there was at first a mindset that it was one or the other. But then I got my orchestral spiccato happening, and I still had the other, and all of a sudden I realized, wait, you can do both.
Yep.
And so somebody would come up and go, oh, you studied with this person, you're a soloist, huh? I was like, no. And you start realizing, no, you can be both.
Right.
You can, and now we see it, and we've seen some great recitals where orchestral players are doing this Edgar Meyer level, type literature beautifully, and they're crossing over, and it's not anymore what it was, so dogmatic, where you're either an orchestra player or you're a soloist or you're whatever. Aaron's a great example.
Yeah.
He's just a fantastic musician, and that's what I used to say that a lot, is like, when are we going to stop being orchestral and solo players and just being musicians?
It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's a good way to look at it. And I think we are seeing more and more of that as we see these fabulous recitals. Yeah. With ever greater frequency from orchestral players and the soloists, obviously also playing in ensembles, chamber ensembles, and orchestras often too.
And the cool thing we have is you cross over into jazz. And it's like I'm the only one on my I can say I'm the only one on my string faculty who does jazz gigs on the side, and that's one of the things I mentioned yesterday. You still have to understand the very fundamental job that we do as bass players. We play money notes.
Yeah.
In every ensemble we do rock, jazz, classical, whatever. We're rhythm section players.
Yeah.
So once we understand that and you're okay with it, it helps keep you from getting burned out if you think you should only get to play really high level
for sure
solo playing all the time, because our job is in an ensemble is something different.
Well, Nick, I'll let you get back to the convention.
Yeah.
I know there are a million things going on, but it's you've been on my list for a long time, recommended many times. So let's do this again soon.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Nick, thanks again for chatting, and I will link up to Nick's page in the show notes so you can learn more about him, and be sure to find him on social media too. He's doing a lot of interesting things for sure, and it was great to sit down and chat with him for the podcast. I love live events like ISB 2019 or Bass Europe or the other events that I go to throughout the year, and it's great for me I think anyway, to record these conversations live at the event. I love that experience of being there live. I do feel a little bit of guilt sometimes because I know I'm pulling people away from other things that they might be doing, but everybody seems to have a good time, so can't wait to do more of these in the future. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and award-winning bass maker Mitch Mooring. Learn more about what he does at his website, mitchmooring.com. And thank you so much to Krista Copper of the Backstage Creative Podcast for all her hard work behind the scenes, cataloging and archiving everything we talk about on this podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.